And our next session is the CXO Super Panel, which is going to look at digital disruption.
We have a very interesting panel and a topic today, and it's about digital disruption and what impact it's having on us, on the industry, what are the opportunities, what are the challenges, and how, as an industry, we can leverage that. Maybe ask a question, how many of you plan to tweet today? That's a fair percentage, maybe 25% of the people. I've been doing some research recently, and the true power of Twitter is not how many people follow you. It's about how many people follow you who have many more followers. There is a service called Triangulate, which allows you to measure your tweet impact. The top 100 followers of UN actually have 300 million followers. So just imagine the magnitude of the impact, right? So with even 100 followers, if you got the right followers, you could be reaching an audience of 1 million or more. So today, companies announce products on Twitter. You also save lives on Twitter. You know, when there's an approaching tornado, you get tweets, and that's instantaneous. So the power of digital cannot be underestimated, and it's impacting everybody, not just the millennials. You know, we may be under the false impression this is a millennial thing. It's not true. We're going to talk about the opportunities side, right? How global companies are leveraging digital, what is it about? We're going to talk about the challenges. And then finally, we'll talk about how companies are leveraging their IT partners to really transform into a digital enterprise. We'll have an engaging discussion, and I have a very illustrious panel with me today. Riazi, she's a CIO with United Nations. To her left is Bernardo Chevez, who is VP of Technology with Hearst International, a global media group. And then extreme left is Ranjit Prithviraj, who is a CIO Managing Director with Fitch Ratings. So we're seeing some of this change happening firsthand. What I see is really a perfect storm that's been brewing for many years, and now that's culminating in companies such as Uber, a company with 1,000 employees, doesn't own a single vehicle, and today they are valued at $40 billion. So there's a lot of disruption enabled by a perfect storm, I would say, in three key vectors: the consumerization and the rapid growth of global markets, where people have access to information anywhere, and they want to consume digitally. They want to buy stuff with a swipe. And the second is really the technology wave that's coming, right, with cloud and automation and mobility and big data, social, and so on. Today, companies that are selling are no longer looking at just Fortune 500. They're looking at Fortune 5 million, which is the number of medium to large-sized businesses globally that you have access to through digital channels, right? What does digital really mean to your organization, right? And what are you doing within your enterprise specifically? Is it hype? Is it reality? I'd like to understand each of your perspective on that, so we have a clear picture of what is this digital disruption about.
I look at digital disruption, and this started 30 years ago. If you look at the travel industry, and we talked about media industry, look at financials, retail. We are moving away from working in the physical world to working in the virtual world. We've created this I would say, parallel universe that we are beginning to live in as humans, and we are starting to figure out how to live there. So we still talk about onshore, offshore, but I don't think it exists in a virtual world. It doesn't exist in a digital world. It's digital and it's machine world. It basically, transactions no longer going to be done by humans. They're done by machines. I mean, we can't be, the new waves aren't so much in transaction. It's in innovation, it's in creation, it's in services. And the digital world brings with itself this huge, if you look at education and healthcare, and we look at social issues of the world as the UN, 500 million people going to bed hungry every night. Disease, we look at water shortage, we look at education for women, protection of women. And I look at the digital world and I say, you know what, I can educate women online. They don't have to leave their homes. Look at healthcare. If we can get a doctor to a place, we can have expert systems that can diagnose, you can have remote doctors. So every sector that we look at, this whole revolution or transformation has had such a huge positive impact. But then we look at the impact of that, because I think as innovators, as technologists, we have such great sophistication to innovate, but we don't see the impact the social impact, the cultural impact, financial impact, security impact. Today, over 80% of child trafficking is done on the internet, in a dark web. You talk about the disruption, it's disrupted. And we are not prepared to address that issue. And it's not only the issue of a UN or a governmental entity, these are our children. It's the issue of the private sector, it's the issue of the tech sector. I'm just scratching the surface when it comes to the world of the cyber, the world of the crime. And I haven't even discussed talking about cyber wars of the future. Because in my world, the government, the way we see government, civil society, rule of law, it doesn't exist in the internet. And we need to discuss how we're going to govern.
So Bernardo, how about you within Hearst, as a global media and publishing company? How is this impacting you?
For us, it has just changed the way how content is consumed around the world, where you had traditional ways of television and magazines, newspapers, that in the traditional ways that we were consuming content. Now with digital, we've leveled almost the playing field where we've baited, taken those traditional ways and modernized and make it easier for people to consume that content. We also now see things that where social comes into play, where before you even had the traditional ways of looking at things of SEO and people going into Google to search for a specific topic or anything. How now more people are coming into us via Facebook and Twitter and other sharing aspects. So it allows for even more connectivity that happens naturally, virally. So it's kind of changed the way people are consuming our content and looking at things. But the challenge there for us is also like, how do we evolve as new systems come into place to absorb that content? Whether it's a new device, a new way of establishing a new social that comes into play. Us trying to get penetration within the Chinese market, for example. These are become challenges for us, and we have to be able to evolve as those challenges approach us. For us, looking to establish that initial baseline foundation of having a system and architecture and infrastructure in place that allows for that level of growth is probably the hardest piece for us. Content is always key for us. It's no longer a question of like, the device is what really powers what people are aiming for. It's what that device can give you. And if there's content, that's what matters. The human aspect of this is still in play just because the people are still creating that content. They're still bringing up topics. They're still bringing up issues that everybody wants to talk about and dialogue about. Being able to provide that forum and that means is actually very key to our business.
To a large extent, the millennial generation today is growing up where they probably never even touched a physical magazine. They've read on an iPad or a smartphone, right? And they're also used to free content. So how do you actually commercialize that content?
Well, I think it's looking at it from other models now where you're no longer like trying to create like either a paywall or something that says like you must pay to see content. For us, it's really about the moments, looking at what is happening now, what is happening today. The problem with what happened with magazines is that pretty much once you get it, or even in newspapers, that pretty much you're reading something that already happened. Yeah. And I think for us, it's just changing those monetization strategies such that now we change with the times. We work with our advertisers to kind of give them a little bit more, traffic numbers that are coming in versus, via the normal means, via socials, or however they're coming in. But really, it's just moving away from the traditional ways of using monetizing off of advertising and trying to look at new ways within the digital space.
Yeah.
For me, I view digital in our organization in a couple of ways. First, obviously, is the customer. How does digital interact with our customer, and how are we able to provide content that we couldn't before? My product team is always trying to come up with these new creative ideas how they can compartmentalize our content and disseminate that content, which doesn't make sense if you don't have the underlying architecture to produce that and show that out. So that's the first piece, is how are we using digital to make our customer experience a lot better? Because obviously if we didn't have customers, none of us would be here. Second piece is we're a very traditional company where you work through invoices. Someone wants to access our content, you sign up a one-year deal, and then we send you an invoice, and then you pay us, and so on and so forth. And what we're looking at is through digital disruption, almost saying, forget all that stuff. You swipe a credit card, you get paid, and that means changing our entire process within the organization from when a customer wants to buy our content to when they consume it to when we bill them. So the second piece of digital is looking at that entire continuum and seeing how we can make that process better and faster. And with it comes things like, if you're entitling them for this product, are you paying them, are they paying for the right product they're seeing, entitlements, etc. So that's the middle piece. Equally important is how we pay our vendors and our service providers, and how we go completely E on that process. So digital is in all those three aspects.
Within your organization, as you're running IT, how do you see your role shifting and changing, and how are you working with your own internal CDOs? How do you manage the digital side of your operations?
I believe every business manager's role is technology and digital, because there's been such convergence and amateurization of technology that you can't really, especially with new workforce, you can't have a business owner, manager, director that doesn't own the digital space and digital relationship. But in terms of understanding the consumer, understanding competition, understanding the workforce, understanding the product, there is a convergence, and the good managers understand both. In terms of the content, of course, we have content officers that manage the content online for dialogue with colleagues and our consumers and our members and member states, which are really our customers. In our business, I don't see it. I saw it in a media business because, of course, as Bernardo mentioned, it just changed tremendously with the content. There is a democratization of content. And it's not only content. With your intellectual property, if you publish a book, only the people who can afford it would read the book. That was the time before us, right? Now you publish the book, most people can read it. It is the whole democratization of intellectual property, where the poor, most of the people who can't afford medicine, who can't afford education, are actually getting access to it. So although it's got the kind of other side with the digital content, but we are providing free content to a lot of people, or free software, or that wouldn't ever have access to it. So I think it's actually closing the digital divide to some extent.
I have the good fortune of working for a very incredible CDO right now, Gary Ellis at Hearst. But I think the way I see it is that for him, it's like having that vision of how best to establish a strategy where we can kind of look at where we were before to where we need to be in the future. Kind of letting every country come up with their own strategies of how to roll out their own technology and content and everything is just not efficient. There's basically we're reinventing the wheel each and every time in each country, where instead we can kind of once again level that playing field to build a strategy that allows us to work together, to innovate together, to be able to establish a foundation together that we can easily add in and evolve with time. Being able to build a platform, for example, where now it takes very minimal time to launch a property in Africa and hire local editor there to kind of just establish content was very key. That was something that years ago we would have had to establish an office, build a relationship there, establish manpower, where now it's like we can do this all virtually. Even the engineers that we're working with are kind of all scattered throughout the world. For me, it's a great time and to see how things have evolved for us, but it's just making sure that we're constantly keeping up with it, because I think that if we stand still and rest on our laurels, the technology is going to move way ahead of us too fast, and we're going to fall behind and not be able to catch up again, and once again having to rebuild it again.
But are you also seeing some of the purchasing power now moving from IT to the CDO or even marketing within your organization or the industry in general?
It's a collaboration amongst multiple departments and groups working together. I mean, for us, for example, you could have the technology, but you still need the content. The CDO kind of, for me at least, provides that level of where we're heading to, but it's still a group effort. It is still a collaboration that is just not, an IT vision or a content vision or product vision. It's a group vision that we're establishing.
Yeah. Seems like you're a little bit ahead of the industry. From what I've been hearing, there is a little bit of a dichotomy between the CDO and the CIO role in many organizations. And it's almost as if marketing wants to kind of exert direct control over purchasing of or making technology and cloud-based decisions. So,
yeah, interesting. First thing, I think a wave has arrived when the acronyms start flying. CDO was a title or an acronym that I hadn't heard of a few years ago. In large organizations, and we're not large by any means, but we're decent size, it's all about collaboration. So our CDO, and he's in the marketing function right now. He reports to our head of marketing and communications. Is that the right place for him? Probably not. Does he need a seat at the table with a CEO and sort of drive our vision? Yes. What we're doing right now is, as we're going through our digital journey, we're working very, very closely with the business, and that's not changed, to come up with what do we want to do digitally? What does our customer experience look like? What does our vendor experience look like? What does our internal experience in working with all our applications? I'll throw another acronym out there. I'm surprised I didn't hear that yet. The SMAC stack. Social, media, mobile, cloud, and analytics, right? Or analytics and cloud. That's the SMAC stack. And not only are you looking at digital, but you're also looking at how is this SMAC stack sort of disrupting you, and having a person, a CDO, looking at all these facets. And I'm sure you're going to talk about security coming up fairly soon. It'll make anyone's head explode. So you can't have one person focus on all that. But I think it's a collaboration, like Bernardo was saying, where the business says, here's what we want, and they have to drive that. The technology guys are saying, okay, you want that, but here's what you need to take care of. And there's somebody sitting there saying, yeah, this is what our vision looks like 5 years out. This is coming from our CEO. And I think, and then somebody like the CDO or the D is looking, saying, how do I make all this happen? And I don't lose track of this digitalization.
Let's talk about the threat aspect. You know, with the proliferation of data and cloud and open source and connected devices, talk about what you're seeing out there as a global organization and how you're protecting your organization and your constituents from these global threats.
We see it from two perspectives. One is that it's not the typical IT stuff that we protect. We worry a lot about our industrial systems, our air traffic system. We are a quasi-military organization as a UN. We have lots of peacekeepers. We go to a country, we set up the power system, we set up the air traffic system, we bring our planes, we bring our pilots, we bring the troops. We set up our own communication system. So my biggest worry is intrusions into our system. You are one of the troops, and we've had access to our medical system, and your blood type is A positive, but the system says A negative. So you look at it from that perspective. We have had an incident, protection of women, a country that doesn't like women protected. And they made a call to the local cell provider. They said, we want you to disconnect all the phones to the UN employees, because they were ready to attack our employees because they didn't like what they did. And that's what I worry about. That's to me cybersecurity. How do we protect them? And the second part of it, more externally focused, is we look at the countries, especially developing markets, Latin America, Africa, Eastern Europe. From an industrial perspective, these countries are extremely weak. Their financial system, their water system, their transportation system, their hospitals, they all connected them to the internet now. And it's really difficult for them to protect themselves. And it's very hard for us to help them protect themselves, because the threats are not coming from the places where they came before, right? I mean, I was CIO of the MTA. I wasn't worried about the guy with a backpack coming into the subway. I was worried about someone from Australia connecting to my signal system and derailing the A train. And that's where the threat is. When I was with NYCHA, the threat for me was someone connecting to our elevators and boilers and increasing temperature to 500 degrees and exploding the boilers. We as CIOs, we're not in that space. And the fact is they're all being connected to the internet, and it is our space. Even within the Western world, we have serious exposure when it comes to our industrial systems and our cities and our governments. We worry about how governments would react to each other in that world. How would they attack each other? And the attacks don't come from governments, they come from a bored 17-year-old. The cyber attacks that these countries are doing to each other is incredible. And it's impacting the regular public. So we need a plan on both sides. We need a plan internally, and we need to think beyond our email stuff. That's just gone. The real protection of our work and our system, and we need to think about it from a government perspective and the governments of the future.
Yeah, and as we move to the software-defined world, you know, these kind of threats are not hypothetical anymore. You know, talking about maybe using Tesla, which is a software-defined car, by all means, somebody hacking into Tesla to, you know, commit murder. So asking you maybe, Ranjit, from a financial security perspective, financial services perspective, right, do you see incidences happening more about cyber theft, and how are financial institutions protecting themselves against this global threat of cyber terrorism and cyber theft?
3-4 years ago, before the SMAC stack made its way to us, we were a very, very controlled, internally focused organization. Everything was on-premise, everything was completely firewalled. All our servers, our machines, our databases, everything was completely managed and controlled. But when we go from a very controlled environment and everybody's feeling very secure to this SMAC environment where suddenly now, for example, we went with Salesforce, which is a CRM application which is out on the cloud. Now suddenly a lot of our customer information is out there on the cloud. Did we do a lot of due diligence with Salesforce to say, how are you protecting this? Yes, we did, but it's out there. And plus now Salesforce is coming and talking about this new thing called Wave, where it's analytics on the cloud. And we're like, okay, well, if we put all our stuff on the cloud for them to analyze for us, what does that mean? Because as it is, there's so many attacks on us, and what happens if they start to divert and go to those organizations? So we're doing everything we can to control outside threats in and inside threats out. But as we go into the SMAC stack, and we're going to have to do that, it's to grow our business and evolve, I think the threat and the challenge levels are going to change significantly, and we have to think through that.
My question is, how are your IT partners helping you through this digital transformation?
The one thing I always think is missing, and I dream of it one day, that a partner will come into my office and would say, you know what, I understand that you need to find mass graves in South Sudan, and I have a device that will do that for you. That connects with what I need. But what I get is, I think partners coming in and say, why don't you buy my software or hardware? And I think the dialogue has changed. We need the help, but we need it in a context of addressing our issues within our sector. A public-private partnership is something that has to grow tremendously, because all the social issues of the world are on our desk to resolve. It's not about profit, it's not about margin, it's not about revenue. It's about the life of that child or about that refugee who lives in a camp for 20 years. And technology has this huge, immense power that we've used in the private sector to achieve our goals. We haven't used it for social revolution. And I want that from my partners.
For us, it's really just, we are having our IT partners coming to us proactively, providing suggestions on how we can improve things on our side. For us, it's just a matter of looking at things from all aspects of what benefits our customers, what's cost effective, as well as what keeps us moving forward in the future.
And you went through a very expensive SAP implementation recently.
Yes, traditional vendors, traditional suppliers, traditional consulting partners understand the traditional business really well. Then there's new companies that are these new companies that understand the new cloud business, I assume pretty well. And I think for someone to come in and understand the whole breadth is difficult. And I literally have a big whiteboard in my office, and I have all my top 5 problems on there all the time. And any vendor that comes to meet me, I'm like, hey, look at this. Can you do this? Oh, I can do 1 and 3, but I can't do 4 and 5. And you know, so that's it's evolving.